Hello and good morning, or good afternoon, whenever you watch this. We are going to really briefly go through talking about freshwater ecosystems. This is going to be pages 3 through, I believe, 11 of your student notes. If you are following along with those, which I definitely recommend that you do. Let's see. We'll start right at the very top of page 3. Aquatic ecosystems are generally classified based on how salty the water is, right? So it's either saltwater or freshwater, or maybe sometimes a mix of the two. We call that salinity. Salinity is just the amount of dissolved salts that water has. There are a few things that affect the global distribution of non-mineral aquatic natural resources, water, such as different types of fish, and it's going to be because of things like salinity, the depth of the water, turbidity, so how much the water is moving. Is it tumultuous or is it very still water? Nutrient availability and temperature. And obviously we break this down into freshwater and marine. Freshwater ecosystems are going to be water that is not salty, and then marine ecosystems are generally going to be the ocean, other saltwater resources, estuaries, things like that. So today we are talking about freshwater ecosystems. Freshwater is just going to be anything that has less than 1% salt dissolved in it. This is going to be lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and wetlands. This is incredibly important, freshwater, obviously, because this is where we get the vast majority of our drinking water. Lakes and ponds can either occur naturally. They can occur from animals. So you can see the example they have right here is a dam that was built by beavers, it looks like, or by humans. Humans have a tendency to dam up rivers and streams as well for our own purposes. So lakes and ponds can occur from any of those ways. So lake stratification, basically, anytime something is stratified, it means it's got layers, right? So like in archaeology, we always talked about stratigraphy. It's the layers of the earth. So in this case, we're talking about lake stratification. It's the different zones. It's the different layers of lakes that are defined by how far they are from the shore and how deep they are. So we've got 4, the littoral zone, the limnetic zone, profundal zone, and the benthic zone. And we're going to dive into those a little bit here. You can kind of see the way that they move is kind of up and down, or across and down. So your littoral zone is going to be where plants are. Your limnetic zone is going to be the open water. This is calling it thermocline, but profundal zone, thermocline is just where the water's dropping off right there. And then profundal is deep water. So starting with the littoral zone, like we said, it's the sloped area close to the land. It's where there's going to be a lot of biodiversity. There's going to be a lot of plant life because the water is not as deep. And so a lot more sunlight can reach there. And a lot of organisms enjoy that, right? So you've got plants, you've got animals. It's a very biodiverse area. This is a fun little graphic, kind of breaking it down. You can see the different zones. You've got your littoral zone over here. You've got so many different organisms living in this area. The limnetic zone, like we said, open water. Profundal zone, we're getting a little bit deeper. And then the benthic zone, out towards the deepest portion of the water. So like we said, limnetic zone, open water area where sunlight is abundant. It's the main zone where you've got photosynthetic activity happening. So things like phytoplankton and zooplankton are pretty common in that area because they are just kind of floating around in the open water, right? You can see again. The profundal zone, on the other hand, is deep open water where it's really too dark for photosynthesis to happen. The oxygen levels are low, and fish are adapted to cooler, darker water that's found here. So if you've ever been on a boat out in a lake or something, like I was in Smith Lake this weekend, if you've ever been on a boat and you got into a lake, right, you're going to, assuming you're like me, you're going to jump off the boat and jump into the water and go swimming, right? So you know that if you got into the water at the edge, you just walked into the edge of the lake, the water's going to be pretty warm, right? It might be kind of mushy on the bottom. You might see some little fish or crawdads or whatever. it's going to be warmer. But if you jump off a boat into that same lake, you're going to eventually, especially like when you go down and you jump in deep, you're going to feel that really cold water. And in the summer, that feels really good, right? But it's going to be colder. The water's going to be darker because there's less photosynthesis happening there, less sunlight reaching that area. So that's how you know you've gotten into the profundal zone. So out in this area. So if you're to walk into the water over here, it's like, oh, it's kind of mushy. There's lots of plants. The water's probably warm because a lot of sunlight's reaching there. But if you're in a boat out in this part and you jump in, you're going to jump in and you're going to pass that limnetic zone and hit that profundal zone where it's going to be nice and cool. There aren't as many organisms there and it's a little bit darker. And then you've got the benthic zone. This is going to be the absolute bottom layer of a lake or pond. It's going to be where the decomposers, detritus feeders, and some fish are. So this is out in the very, very bottom. Oopsie. Nope. No, thank you. No, thank you. What have I done? Technology is awful. Okay. So absolute bottom layer, benthic zone, as you can see. Lakes come in a few different classifications. We base those off of nutrient content and primary productivity, so how productive they are as an ecosystem. You've got three kinds. You've got oligotrophic lakes, eutrophic lakes, and mesotrophic lakes. So we know that when we talked about heterotrophs and autotrophs at the very beginning, we know that troph means to eat, right, or to consume. So we can definitely get some hints of these meanings based on that. They all have the word trophic in there. But like I said, they are based on nutrient content and primary productivity. So starting with the oligotrophic lake, they have a really small amount of plant nutrients, not a whole lot. They're going to have really steep banks. They're going to have very, very clear water. It's beautiful. And low net primary productivity. So not a whole lot of productivity here. But because of that, you don't have the algae, you don't have the phytoplankton or the mud or the decomposers. So there's a little bit of organic life in here, but for the most part, it's just really beautiful, clear water. You also have eutrophic lakes, and we're going to get into what eutrophication is later on down the road, but eutrophic lakes have a large supply of nutrients, maybe even too many. They're very shallow. The water's probably kind of murky. So you can see this one murky, meaning like it's green. You can't really see very far into the water. And they have a high net primary productivity. And then the mesotrophic lake, meso normally means middle, right? That makes sense. So the mesotrophic lake is an intermediate layer between the oligotrophic and the eutrophic lakes. So mesotrophic is probably kind of what we're used to seeing, right? A eutrophic lake is going to be kind of gross, honestly, very green, kind of nasty. Mesotrophic's like where I want to go swimming, right? Because you got some fish and you've got some filtering happening there. Pretty good. And then oligotrophic's just absolutely stunning, really steep banks, and not a whole lot of organic matter in there. There's two different types of eutrophication and lake aging that can happen. You're going to have natural, which takes centuries to happen. It takes a very long time. It comes from nutrients and sediments that have eroded into the body of water. And then you also have cultural eutrophication and lake aging. And this can only take decades. I mean, it's super quick. And it comes from human-induced urban runoff, sewage, industrial waste, fertilizers, pesticides, and excess sediments. So things like fertilizing a golf course, right? It takes a lot of fertilizer to keep golf course grass happy. So that fertilizer ends up washing out with the rain, and then it ends up in our natural bodies of water. And because of that, you end up with eutrophic lakes like this, where there's just so much algae and it's choking out all the fish, and it's not a good situation. Oh, this is what I was saying. So eutrophication is just that process. It's when a body of water becomes rich in nutrients. And when you look at that, you're like, okay, a body of water became rich in nutrients. That's pretty cool, right? Like, it's a good thing. That sounds like a good thing. But that can lead to algal blooms, decreases in dissolved oxygen concentrations, and huge fish kills. So when we say cultural eutrophication, it makes sense because cultural means it's going to have something to do with humans, right? Eutrophication that's caused by man-made inputs of nutrients. So at the very base, that very first sentence right here, it's like, rich in nutrients, 10 out of 10. But when you've got all those nutrients, or fertilizers or nitrogen or whatever it is that's being added in, it can lead to things like algal bloom. So when there's so many nutrients, there's so much nitrogen, there's so much fertilizer, it causes algae to just explode, like tons and tons and tons of algae, which can lead to that green water. And what that does is it really just chokes out all the other life that was in that ecosystem before. And because of that, there's less dissolved oxygen, and it can cause fish kills. So you can see kind of how it begins to happen. As you've got this one, you can see the rainbow arrows representing the amount of, sunlight that's able to reach into the water. So over here, you've got some good, clean water. People are swimming. It's nice. It's more natural. Over here, with the factories and with livestock, you've got phosphorus and nitrogen that's being released out into the water. And what that does is it causes lots of algae to be able to grow, right? And so now that sunlight can't reach as far down, and it just creates this nasty, murky, dagnabbit. Technology is hard. Truly. Oh no. Nope. I quit. I should edit this out, but I probably won't. Hello? Whatever, we're just gonna keep going. Oh. Right. So the downhill flow of water, moving right along from cultural and natural eutrophication. Downhill flow of water, it makes sense, right? It's logic. Streams that begin at higher altitudes, well, they always begin at higher altitudes where rainwater and snow both collect. And they're going to go downhill. It's gravity. That's how it works, right? There are 3 different zones of downhill flow. You're going to have source zone, transition zone, and floodplain zone. We're going to talk about each of those. And they kind of make sense, right? So your source zone, here's the source. It's the rain and snow. It's a glacier that's melting. It's rapids. It's things like that. That's slowly going to trickle down because gravity. You've got your transition zone, and you can kind of see we're transitioning from still a little bit rocky, still a little bit mountainous. You got some tributaries that are coming in here until finally it goes out here into the floodplain zone where things are going to really level out and head out towards the ocean because that's where all streams lead, right? Source zones are normally more narrow. They're shallow. The water is going to be very cold because normally they're coming from rain and snowfall, and they're higher up altitude-wise, so they're going to be pretty cold. The water's going to be very clear. They move fast. So people who go whitewater rafting, probably going to be in source zone areas. They dissolve large amounts of oxygen, tons of oxygen, because the water is being constantly oxygenated, right? Those rapids, it's swiftly flowing, it's shallow, it's hitting a lot of rocks. So as that's happening, a lot of oxygen is being incorporated into the water. There's almost no production at all, no net primary productivity, because the water is really low in nutrients because it just came straight from the sky. So you can kind of see it's melting, it's coming from the snow, it's coming from glaciers, it melts, and you can see as the water comes out this way, as it hits those rocks, it's getting very well oxygenated. You move on to your transition zone. It's going to be wider, deeper. The water is going to be a little bit warmer. It's going to be flowing a little bit slower. It's a little bit murkier, so it's not quite so clear and clean. And it's containing less dissolved oxygen, which makes sense, right? Because it's not hitting those rocks. It's not being really, what's the word? The turbidity. The turbidity is lower because it's not hitting as many rocks. As you can see, it's just kind of, we're calming down a little bit. We're slowing down. Water's getting a little bit murkier because it's staying a little bit more still. You can see, not quite perfectly clear, right? Very pretty though. And then finally, you've got your floodplain zone. These are going to be wider. They're deeper. This is rivers, right? They flow across broad, flat areas. The water is much warmer. There's way less dissolved oxygen, and the water might even be muddy in appearance. So I grew up in Gadsden on the Coosa River, and we would always call it the mighty muddy Coosa. So much muddier water. You can see it's moving slow. There's nothing really to break it up and make it all oxygenated and nice. So it's kind of murkier. You've also got something that we call a river delta. And this is going to be an area at the mouth of a river that didn't used to exist, but now it does because it's built up deposited sediments over time. So you can kind of see here, this is a river, right? It's headed to the ocean, but these deposited sediments have built up this whole delta right here. So previously, this would have just gone straight out into the ocean, right? But over time, those sediments that the water's picked up as it's moving through from the source zone, the transition zone, and the floodplain zone, as it's going through all those, it's picking up minerals and sediments. And so finally at the end, it's like, okay, we're tired. The water's tired of carrying these sediments, and it's going to end up dropping them right there. And you've got a delta, which makes it kind of back up into this area. It might have been a very small river, kind of like this. It might have been very small at first, but now because those sediments have been being left there over hundreds of thousands of years, now the river is expanding because it can't get out into the ocean as easily as it used to. You can see kind of the breakdown of all of this, how all rivers kind of tie in at some point or another. The Missouri River is all the way up in Montana at some point, which is something that I think a lot of people don't realize how connected they all are. And all rivers lead to the ocean, right? Missouri River goes through Kansas City, St. Louis, ends up in the Mississippi River. The Tennessee River, which we've got over here near us, Tennessee River ends up connecting to the Mississippi and eventually going down into the Gulf through New Orleans. So they're all connected, and they're all heading from north to south as they flow towards the Gulf of Mexico for the most part. So that is where we are stopping today. We're not getting into wetlands just yet. And that will be that. I should have recorded this sooner because I'm going to meet with y'all live in like 15 minutes, but hopefully this was helpful. And don't forget to check out the the A+ College Ready YouTube page. I linked it at our updates tab because they go through all of our notes as well. So it might just be good to have another perspective or hear somebody else explain it differently, whatever way. So I will see you guys soon. How do I stop it?